Imagine walking through the marble streets of Rome in the year 67 AD. The air is heavy with the scent of incense, the hum of merchants, and the distant sound of sandals striking stone. In the heart of the forum, the emperor himself appears. Nero, ruler of the known world, strides forward, adorned in imperial purple. At his side walks a young figure, draped in silk and glittering jewels. The people murmur, their voices weaving a whispering net of scandal. For all know the truth, this woman was not born a woman. Once, this was a boy named Sporus. What Nero had done to him was no mere imperial caprice, it was an act that history would remember as both cruel and strange, a mingling of obsession, grief, and the will of a man who believed his power limitless. The name Sporus might mean little to you now, but his tale is one that lingers in the mind long after it is told. To understand it, one must first look upon the man who shaped his fate. Nero was not always the tyrant history remembers. When he took the throne at 16, Rome dared to hope for a golden age. He lowered taxes, filled the city with festivals, and even performed on stage, earning the adoration of the common people. But absolute power is a poison, and in time it corroded his soul. By 65 AD, something within him had fractured, perhaps from the constant paranoia of an emperor surrounded by rivals, perhaps from the loneliness of standing so far above all others, unable to be challenged or corrected. Or perhaps the crack began with her, Poppaea Sabina. She was beauty wrapped in ambition, sharp of mind, and dangerous to oppose. Nero's first sight of her ignited a fire. At the time, he was bound to Octavia, daughter of the previous emperor, a marriage of politics, cold and loveless. Octavia was quiet, reserved, a shadow in the grand halls. Poppaea was light and fire, her presence commanding every eye. Their affair began as so many Roman scandals did, whispered meetings, stolen glances, and the dangerous thrill of defiance. What began as a scandal ripened into obsession. Adultery, in Rome, was common talk. But this was something else. Nero was not merely enchanted by Poppaea's beauty. He was consumed. Even his closest advisors grew uneasy. His temper turned erratic. Possessive. At public rites and games, if another man's gaze lingered too long, Nero's fury flashed like steel. He stationed guards about her, ostensibly for protection, in truth to measure every word she spoke and every glance she traded. Gifts poured upon her like tributary rivers, jewels from India, silks from distant China, perfumes from Arabia. The palace glittered, the treasury groaned. Then he bent the world to fit his desire. First, the emperor cast aside Octavia. Rome gasped, old allies drew back. Then came the proclamation, Poppaea would be his wife, crowned before gods and people in a spectacle without precedent. Musicians played until dawn. Incense rolled like fog across marble steps. The emperor had declared what his heart had already decided. Yet marriage did not still the hunger. Poppaea found herself set apart, withdrawn from kin, ringed by courtiers who owed their careers to Nero's favor alone. He filled halls and chambers with her likeness, portraits in gilded frames, statues in polished stone. Even in her absence, she was present, multiplied by art, watched by the man who would not look away. Ancient witnesses say he would sit for hours and observe her, walking, speaking, breathing, confusing love with possession, and a living soul with a treasured object. What Rome praised as devotion looked, on closer view, like a tightening net. Poppaea understood the game. She was quick of mind. She knew that beauty and the emperor's attention gave her power no woman had held in generations, and that such power balanced on the edge of a knife. She used her position to lift her family, to plant friends in key places, to weave a shield of obligations around herself in case the emperor's favor shifted with the winds. But she bore one flaw, if flaw it can be called. Poppaea retained her own spirit. She did not always bow to the emperor's whims. She argued policy when she thought him wrong. She criticized his artistic ventures. At times, she even mocked his performances when they failed to soar. In a city where most learned to read the emperor's face before he spoke, Poppaea still dared to answer as an equal. And in that courage lay both her brilliance, and the seed of danger yet to bloom. The records differ, as they often do when emperors are involved. Some say it began over his late return from the chariot races. Others whisper it was over his endless pursuit of the stage. But all accounts agree on the ending, and that ending would darken Nero's soul forever. It was the year 65 AD. In the palace, words sharpened like drawn blades. Poppaea, heavy with the child who might have been their second, dared to strike at the heart of his vanity. She accused him of caring more for the roar of the crowd than for the duties of a husband or the bonds of a father. Perhaps the weight of her condition made her less willing to bear his caprices. Perhaps she had simply reached the edge of her patience. Then, before the eyes of Rome's gods, the emperor lost himself. Whether it was a single, devastating blow to her belly or a brutal flurry of violence, no one can say with certainty. But it was enough. The marble floor drank in her agony, and the palace walls bore witness to the undoing of the woman he claimed to love above all others. And in the moment after, the ruler of 60 million souls, lord of legions, master of life and death, stood powerless. The obsession that had burned so brightly was now collapsing into ash. Poppaea lay before him, her breath fading, the child within her already lost. Ancient chroniclers speak of a sight both pitiful and grotesque, Nero throwing himself upon her body, begging forgiveness with tears, then ordering her to live as if even death could be bent to imperial will. Physicians were summoned from every corner of Rome. Promises of wealth clashed with threats of torment. But the fates had already cut the thread. Within hours, Poppaea was gone, her beauty stilled, her womb empty, her voice forever silent. In that hour, grief did not merely wound the emperor. It unmoored him from the world. He refused the pyre, breaking with the ancient customs of his people. Instead, her body was embalmed, laid in a tomb more splendid than any Rome had seen. He proclaimed her divine, raising temples and altars in her honor. And yet he could not let go. Day after day, he spoke to her as though she might answer. In the banquet halls, her seat remained untouched. Courtiers addressed her in the present tense, lest they meet the same fate as those who counseled him to move on, exile, or worse. It was in this twilight of reality, between morning and madness, that another figure came into focus. A youth named Sporus. 14, perhaps 15 years of age. Born into slavery beneath the imperial roof, later freed while still a boy. He had grown within the palace's marble embrace, tutored in letters and accounts, groomed for service among Rome's elite. Such a life was rare fortune for one born in chains. Freedmen of the emperor often lived in greater comfort than many freeborn citizens. Yet it was a fortune bound by iron threads, utter dependence on imperial favor. The same hand that raised them could, at a whim, cast them into ruin or death. And for Sporus, Nero's gaze was about to become both the crown of privilege, and the shadow of doom. In the shattered world of Nero's mind, Sporus was not merely a youth, he was an echo of the dead. The resemblance was uncanny. Around the eyes, in the softness of the cheeks, in the fragile grace of his face, the dead empress seemed to live again. For Romans steeped in omens and superstition, such likeness was no accident. It spoke of fate, of souls bound across lifetimes. And for Nero, it was nothing less than divine intervention. The first time his gaze fell upon Sporus after Poppaea's death, something unhinged clicked into place. Here was salvation. Here was the impossible, the chance to restore what he had destroyed with his own hands. The only flaw in the vision was that Sporus was a boy. But for a man who now fancied himself half-god, conqueror of death's finality, such details were trivial. What followed was not passion, nor even desire, it was calculated cruelty. Nero resolved not to dress Sporus as a woman, but to make him one in every way his age's crude science allowed. He summoned the most skilled physicians of Rome, their orders clear and absolute, reshape this body into the image of Poppaea Sabina. The procedure was dangerous, agonizing, and irreversible. Many who endured it died of fever or blood loss. Those who survived bore wounds deeper than flesh, the permanent theft of their identity. Sporus, pinned down by guards, could only scream into the unlistening air as the physicians went about their work. When he emerged weeks later, pale and hollow-eyed, Nero unveiled the next act in his grotesque theater, a wedding. Not a private union, but an imperial spectacle to rival the grandest ceremonies of the Republic. Sporus would take the name Sabina, live in quarters once belonging to the dead Empress, and wear her jewels as if they were heirlooms rightfully his. Seamstresses labored over gowns designed to conceal any trace of the youth's former body. Goldsmiths set emeralds and pearls into ornaments Poppaea herself had worn. Court artists taught him the art of illusion, kohl to widen the eyes, rouge to paint false warmth into his cheeks, powders to soften the angles of his face. And still, the transformation was not complete. Hairdressers bent their skill to shaping his hair in the latest imperial styles, elaborate curls and braids, pinned with gemstones. Tutors drilled him daily in the choreography of femininity, how to walk with measured grace, how to sit in still poise, how to let the hands speak in delicate gestures. Every stitch, every curl, every motion rehearsed was another chisel strike against who Sporus had been. And in Nero's mind, each stroke brought him closer to raising Poppaea from the grave. In the months leading up to the ceremony, Sporus' life became a relentless rehearsal. He learned to hold his hands in delicate arcs, to place his feet with careful grace, to arrange his garments just so when seated. His walk was reshaped into a glide, strength traded for softness. Voice coaches worked tirelessly to bend his speech into higher tones, teaching the verbal flourishes expected of Rome's noblewomen. Of all the lessons, this was the hardest, for voice is the truest echo of the self, and changing it meant silencing the last trace of who he had been. The transformation was as much mental assault as physical. Every glance in the mirror revealed a stranger, painted, jeweled, and wrapped in silks. Every piece of Poppaea's jewelry was not an ornament but a chain, fastening him to a dead woman's shadow. The more perfect the image, the more absolute the erasure. Spring of 67 AD arrived, and with it, the wedding. Nero aligned the date with sacred festivals, binding his spectacle to the weight of religion. The great hall of the palace bloomed with foreign flowers, their scent heavy in the lamplight of thousands of flames. Musicians played the ancient songs of Roman matrimony. Servants poured wine from jeweled ewers, their hands steady despite the strangeness of the day. To the uninformed eye, it was the marriage of an emperor to his empress. To those who knew, it was something far darker, the most powerful man alive marrying a surgically altered boy remade in the image of his dead wife. Yet the rituals were all observed, the vows, the clasping of hands, the sacred bread, the signing of the imperial documents. Guests smiled, offered gifts, and spoke words of joy as if their lives did not depend on this performance, but the air was taut with concealed revulsion. From that day forward, Sporus was treated as the Empress of Rome. He was granted a staff, a household, his own apartments, and an imperial income. A litter bore him through the streets, his escorts dressed in the colors of state. At banquets he sat at Nero's right hand, laughing on cue, nodding at stories, performing the role to perfection. Nero never wavered in his delusion. He called Sporus Poppaea, as if the name alone could raise the dead. He reminisced about shared moments that had never occurred, expecting answers that matched the fantasy. For Sporus, every conversation was a test, every response had to be given as if he truly remembered a life he had never lived. Over time, he became eerily adept at this high-stakes deception, anticipating Nero's moods with an almost supernatural precision. But the toll was visible in his silence when the crowds were gone. Behind closed doors, he drifted into melancholy, waking each morning in chambers draped with reminders of a woman he had never met. Every reflection was a mask. Every word was a lie. This fragile reality would soon be carried beyond Rome's marble walls. For in the year following the wedding, Nero announced his grand tour of Greece, and Sporus would be at his side. Nero's obsession traveled with him to Greece. There, the self-proclaimed artist competed in every festival that would have him, convinced only the Greeks could truly appreciate his genius. At every stop, Sporus stood beside him, adorned in jewels, robed in silks, the Empress of Rome to all who watched. Imagine the Greek elites, schooled in politics and myth, forced to pretend they believed this obvious charade, bowing to a youth whose very existence was a living fiction. But by 68 AD, Nero's empire was cracking. His extravagance and neglect had pushed governors and generals into open rebellion. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state, and even the Praetorian Guard, his own protectors, turned against him. Nero fled Rome with only a few loyal followers. Sporus was among them, carried along like a treasured relic the emperor could not abandon. They hid in a villa on the city's edge, clinging to fantasies of rescue even as soldiers closed in. Nero swung between plotting an impossible escape and staging his own death with theatrical precision. When the end came, he chose suicide over capture, leaving Sporus suddenly and terribly exposed. In the chaos that followed, Sporus became a prize to be claimed. First seized by Poppaea Sabina, then passed to Otho, and finally to Vitellius, he remained trapped in the role Nero had forced upon him, dressed as a woman, called by Poppaea's name, his identity reduced to an echo of a dead empress. Each new master treated him less as a person and more as an imperial trophy. Under Vitellius, the humiliation reached its limit. The emperor planned to display Sporus in the Colosseum, reenacting scenes of mythic violation before thousands of jeering spectators. For Sporus, this was not merely another performance, it was the ultimate desecration. Rather than endure it, he made the only choice that was truly his own. Sometime in 69 AD, likely no older than 20, Sporus took his life, poison, most say, ending the grotesque play in which he had been forced to star. History has often reduced him to a footnote, a curiosity in the chronicles of imperial excess. But what makes his story endure is not just the cruelty he suffered, it is the fact that even after years of erasure, some hidden ember of selfhood remained. His suicide was both tragedy and defiance, the refusal to let Rome take the last shred of his dignity. We know almost nothing of the boy before Nero saw him. No record of his dreams, his ambitions, or the life he might have lived. Those were stolen, replaced with the image of another, until Sporus ceased to exist anywhere but in the emperor's mind. And yet, in the end, he reclaimed the smallest, most essential freedom, the right to decide his own fate. It is a reminder that behind the grand marble facades and triumphal processions of empire lie human stories, not of glory, but of suffering, resilience, and the will to remain, if only for one final moment, in control of one's own life.